Ranking up in Valorant isn't as straightforward as getting a ton of kills, as I have previously proved when I got 49 kills, yet still lost by 4 rounds, so how exactly do you rank up in Valorant? Despite the game being officially out for less than 2 months, there's still a ton of incredibly important tips to know about if you plan on trying to get as high a rank as possible in Riot's new excuse for entertainment. I might not have ever played against players in the Radiant rank, but I have had the pleasure of playing amongst people from Iron all the way to Immortal across my multiple accounts, so you can trust that I know what I'm talking about. I'm Shakes, and here are my top 5 most important tips for ranking up in Valorant. A lot of behavior in Valorant is kind of just mimicked from behaviors people have in Counter-Strike, as such a large portion of its audience have played Counter-Strike before, and because of that, a lot of people don't use utility nearly as much or as well as they should. In Counter-Strike, a full buy of utility costs upwards of $1,000 alongside a generally more harsh economy system, paired with the fact that hitting nades takes a lot of practice, which all leads a lot of people outside the highest of ranks to not use utility nearly as much as they should or not use it properly. In Valorant, however, utility is not only far cheaper in comparison, but much easier to use properly and get value out of. Despite this, many players focus on purchasing weapons first and thinking about utility later, as though spending $2,900 for a Vandal then getting one-tapped is a better value purchase than a $200 flashbang that would have gotten you the advantage in the fight and probably would have led to you winning it even if you had a cheaper weapon. It's important to think about purchasing utility first because not only is it way more cost efficient for how useful it is, think about it, you spend hundreds more on a Vandal or a Phantom over the Bulldog despite the only difference being a few stat benefits, while purchasing a wall for a fraction of the price would instantly give you an advantage in value for your money. Even if you win your gunfights, it's pretty rare that the weapon you purchase had a major effect. I mean, I'd say 9 out of 10 of your kills with a Vandal would have probably been a success with the Bulldog as well, while every single time you use utility, things instantly go into motion. Enemies have to move out of their hiding places, you get a massive advantage in a gunfight by blinding them, you give you and your team a lot of free space onto site, and many other examples. The point here is that you should focus more on buying utility first and trying to use it as much as possible every single round, because even if it doesn't hit or gets wasted, it's a hell of a lot better use of your money than the insignificant benefits you would have gotten from purchasing a more expensive weapon. I'm not saying buying better weapons aren't worth the price, it's just that utility and setting up for a fight with as many advantages as possible is how you should be playing instead of just dry peeking and hoping you have better aim. As a pro CS player that I forgot the name of had once stated, you never want to take on an equal fight. You always want to set yourself up for an advantage because just depending on your raw aim skill, no matter how good you are, is not a reliable way to win rounds. Learn to use utility frequently and you'll be surprised at how much easier and safer it is to make plays in Valorant. The next big tip I have for ranking up in Valorant is simply learning as many roles as possible and being willing to fill for your teammates. Most players in competitive that I see that are stuck at low ranks don't necessarily have bad aim or game sense, they just play maybe 1 or 2 agents and insta-lonk whichever one they want, which leads the team to having a bad team comp. Team composition is incredibly important in Valorant, believe it or not, because trying to push into a site when your team has 4 duelists and no one to put down walls or smokes is going to be a hard task no matter how good you are at one-taps. Having one controller to put down smokes, a Sage to heal, and maybe another utility-heavy agent like Cypher is necessary to be able to get onto site or defend a site against better teams, and if you don't know how to play enough agents to fill in whatever role is needed once your teammates inevitably insta-lock Jet and Phoenix, you're just going to be fighting an upward battle from the second you begin the match. I recommend learning at least one of each type of agent so you'll always be prepared to pick up the slack once your teammates insta-lock all the least useful characters. Not only learning the agents, but being willing to pick last to help out your teammates is not only a selfless act that will be applauded by the Valorant gods for better RNG when crouch spraying with the Vandal, but will give you good practice across all the agents and make you win way more games in the long run. I'm not saying you have to give up being a Reyna main because I for sure haven't, but more that you should only pick your favorite agents in competitive once you realize that your team composition could use another duelist. Not that that's ever going to be the case, I mean everyone's main is practically a duelist at most ranks below Immortal, but a gamer can dream. Probably the biggest difference between bad and good players in any kind of tactical first-person shooter lies not in their ability to move or shoot or actually think about decisions before making them, but their patience. Believe me, when playing against Iron and Bronze players in my early placement matches, it was not my aim or game sense that made me do so much better than them, but mostly my patience that gave me the upper hand. The more impatient you are, the more predictable you play, and with that you will walk into every single trap the enemy set for you. Patience isn't just being able to wait around a corner for a full minute without pushing, it's being able to stay alert and sustaining an advantageous position for as long as you need to get the job done. Waiting for the right time to strike and being willing to push back out of a site you're holding to wait for reinforcements instead of just trying to 1v5 and get a few lucky hits is a lesson many will learn from experience, but you can learn right now. Make decisions based less on making things happen now and more on things happening right. It's hard to explain how to become more patient, as a lot of what this skill entails is just built on experience and decision making, but recognizing that waiting for the opportune moment to make a play may take longer than you want, but still going through with it is one of the most important things you will learn in your time playing Valorant. If you've ever watched a professional game from either either Valorant or Counter-Strike, you would know how important patience is and how every moment is less them getting ready to make a play and more them waiting for their opponents to make a mistake that they can capitalize on. Doing the same and being patient will make you have the exact same mindset as a pro in one of the most important ways. Of course, you won't have the aim skill, teamwork, positioning, or game sense of a pro, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Understanding your weaknesses is useful for getting better at literally anything you want to get good at, but in Valorant it's even more important than you might think just because of how separated each of the skills are with one another. A lot of times finding your weaknesses is a challenge because many factors can overlap in other things like playing a sport, but in Valorant players always seem to be really good at a lot of the skills that are important to doing well, but tend to miss out on just one or two vital things that make them play way below their potential. If you want to get good, understand where you're failing, and then it's pretty easy to get better once you have an understanding of what's holding you back. Recognize what part of your game is failing you. Maybe in fair gunfights you always seem to lose. Try working on your aim. Maybe you find yourself in positions where you're stuck and forced into a bad situation. Work on better positioning yourself. Maybe you rush too much or push early. Work on getting better patience. There's many different things that could be your shortcomings, and the best way to recognize them is to recollect after you die and realize what led to you not winning the engagement. Of course, it's not always going to be your fault. I mean, professional players die all the time and you can't expect to win every single scenario. That would be just absurd. But instead of blaming your teammates for being terrible for the 12th time that match, maybe just look over what you could have done better so you can work on becoming a better player in the long run. If you really are serious about getting good at Valorant, a lot of pros would recommend recording and watching over your own matches so you can watch your decisions being played out from an outside perspective after the fact, which will give you a ton of information about how you're thinking and the mistakes that you'll inevitably make from a far more objective perspective. Or just go with a tried and tested method, my only weakness is my team. That excuse seems to work a lot. The last major tip that I'm going to be giving you is probably the most complex and challenging one to incorporate, but the benefit you get out of it is incredible once you know what you're doing. It's to understand if you can trust your team. Valorant is a team game, everyone knows that, but even for a team game, team play is even more important to you winning games because not only does each person get only a single agent to play, meaning they can only typically fill a single role for their team, but when pushing into a site, for example, there are so many different areas where the enemies could be hiding or could peek from that at a point you're going to have to depend on your teammates for support whether you like it or not. This leads me to the point of understanding if you can trust your teammates. A general rule of thumb is that the lower down you go in the ranks, the less you can depend on your teammates for proper support, while as you climb higher and higher, they're going to be more dependable. If this sounds a little too intangible, let me give you an example. Say you fake push B on bind and then went back to A with your teammates, everyone in the round still alive, and once you get there, you have the bomb, but the site seems empty. At low ranks, it's going to be hard to trust your teammates to watch over you while you plant because many of them don't have the game sense to understand where the enemies will most likely be watching, or won't have the aim to be able to protect you, assuming that the enemies peek and begin firing. At higher ranks, however, you can at least hope that all likely areas from where the enemies will come from will be watched and you can at least try to plant safely. Again, I said that as a general rule of thumb because there's so many different scenarios where I hoped my teammates would be watching my back even at the higher ranks, but alas, they were simply hiding and waiting for me to get shot at so they can go in and get the trade. From the very first round, realize if your teammates are the kind to push as fast as possible and care little for their own safety, focusing mainly on making space for their team over caring about surviving, or if your teammates are the kind to never want to push anything because they're afraid of dying and ruining their glorious KD ratio. It sucks to have teammates that care more about their individual stats than about winning the game, but simply recognizing their team is full of them will give you the ability to play way better because at least understanding your weaknesses as a team will allow you guys to figure out how to improve throughout the match. If you don't understand if you can trust your teammates, you're going to be putting yourself in a lot of dangerous positions by hoping your back is being watched when it really isn't, or by holding back when your teammates need your support during a push or defense. Recognize if you can trust them to watch your back while planting, or just throw to another teammate if you know you can't trust these guys to protect you from the most obvious openings. It sucks sometimes to play with people only watching their own back, but at least if you understand that they can't be trusted, you won't be too pissed once you bait yourself to give your team space and they don't capitalize because you know that's simply a result of how they play, not how you play. Well, you're still probably gonna be pissed, but at least you know it's not cause you're bad, right? Anyway, before I close out this video, I'll shoot a few quickfire important tips to know that don't really require a full segment to understand. Firstly, if you're going to main a specific agent or specific few agents, learn the lineups for the utility, like knowing good Sova dart shots, Viper wall lineups, or Cypher camera spots, because these things are often incredibly useful and almost overpowered if you know a good share of them. Try to reset your sprays earlier than you would in other games, because outside of a quick burst, the weapon's recoil almost instantly becomes random horizontally, which would make winning gunfights up to RNG, and that's not a very consistent way to win engagements. Watch pros like Hiko to see how to do it properly. Most of them just do a quick 2 to 3 shot bursts or one taps with things like the Vandal, because it's way easier to just click on heads instead of trying to adjust for the inaccurate recoil in a lot of situations. Remember to try and synchronize purchase rounds with your teammates so all of you guys can full buy on the same round so you can stand a chance in case your economy isn't very good. If attacking, remember to have someone watch behind or have Cypher traps watching your flanks, because it is really easy to get flanked in Valorant if no one is watching behind, especially on Haven. Try not to let the Sage go first because she has a res and a heal, which are both useful later into rounds, rounds, and finally try to balance the amount of heavy utility agents you have per site on defense, or in other words, don't stack both Cypher and Sage on one site. Those are what I would consider the most important tips necessary to ranking up in Valorant. If you guys have any additional tips you'd like to give me, as I could always use more knowledge on how not to be bad at video games, then you can tell me in the comments. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe the video if you subscribe the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully. Maybe we'll never see each other again. Potentially you may see this one video and go on with your life, and our paths may never cross again. In that case, good travels, friend. Goodbye.